Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I am Jaskaran Sandhu, a national board member and the Director of Administration for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. Today, it's a great honor of ours and it's a great pleasure of ours at the World Sikh Organization to be hosting Rana Ayyub, an esteemed and globally recognized journalist, investigative journalist who's won countless awards, has written and her work has appeared in major publications internationally and India, and currently writes with the Washington Post. Rana, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we couldn't do this in person as we originally planned, but this is obviously the next best thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you to the World Sikh Organization. I was looking forward for our tour in Canada and meeting everybody in person, because my trip in 2016 was 2017 actually was such a delight, and meeting members of the Sikh community, going to gurdwaras across the country. But I'm glad we can do this given the circumstances. Also, a warning: I'm a bit drained out because I have the flu. Not COVID yet. I'm testing for it in a few days. But I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can in this state of mind of mine. But I'm really glad to be joining this, and I hope to an enlightening conversation with all of you.
So, Rana, I think before we kind of hop into the nitty-gritty of the topic at hand on criminalizing dissent in India, which is obviously a very important conversation in light of today, symbolically, which is the Independence Day of India. Yesterday was Independence Day of Pakistan.
Right.
But also in light of a lot of the news that's been coming out of India and global trends on criminalizing dissent as well. But before we hop into the nitty-gritty of that, I'm actually interested because we've been watching your social media feed for a while, and you've been doing a lot of humanitarian work. And I thought maybe it's a good opportunity to start there and just get your insights on the kind of work that's happening right now and the state of affairs on the ground.
I think if there is one thing, people who know me will vouch for the fact that if you keep me grounded at home, especially, I've never seen a lockdown before, so have none of us. I would have gone insane given the fact that I was unable to move. This lockdown really has kept my sanity, especially with the hatred around and with the wild stuff and the majoritarian slide of the country. It feels like we are living in two different countries. One where there is political opportunism, where we are laying the foundation stone of a temple in the midst of a raging pandemic. India is now number 3. And another India where we have been traveling all across the country, especially in Assam and Bihar, where there are people who have not eaten a meal for close to 3 days. And when we went there, these are middle class people who have never begged in their life. I have never seen something like this before. So what happened is sometime around the end of March, when this lockdown just was imposed in India, the migrants were marching home. And I was passing, I'd gone to pick up some Alfonso mangoes for my family. And there was this, near a railway station, there were these bunch of migrants who were sitting. And among them was a pregnant woman. And I asked her what was the last meal she ate. She said it was 2 days ago, it was a banana. And that really made me stare at my own privilege. Here I am hunting for Alfonso mangoes in the midst of a lockdown. And here there are women, especially a pregnant woman, and there are millions like them. Which is why I started this keto page where I asked for donations to help as many people as we could. And as much as I loathe what's happening in the country, I lament the majoritarian slide of the country. I was amazed at the donations and the cooperation by well-meaning people in India. That kind of reinstilled my faith in the democracy, that within a span of a week, we managed to collect about 1 crore. And then, and as of today, we have managed to, provide ration to about 50,000 families, send 6,000 migrant workers back home every day. There is some place or the other where we go to. I personally am traveling in each of the affected areas. So it's been, I think, we always say that journalists cannot be activists. I don't think I'm doing activism right now. But as a journalist, I cannot look at something and look the other way. If I'm reporting something, I just cannot look the other way and think, but I've done my job of reporting, now it's up to people. What this lockdown really taught me is to kind of, if you have a public voice and if you can help people and if you have a a command in social media followers, why not use that platform to help people? And this lockdown was a revelation. And we have been doing this relief work for now 4 months now, and we are running out of funds. So my so the Keto account is pinned on my Twitter page and my Instagram page. Do whatever you can, because this is the time humanity really needs us.
No, that's amazing, and I think again, there's a lot one can do, and boots on the ground. You can't replicate the impact that has, and humanitarian
Right.
work is critical and crucial, and especially for folks in India and everywhere else in the world that are struggling through the COVID and other natural disasters that are coming up in more frequency. So thank you so much for sharing that. We'll also share a link to the donations in the chat. I know some people have asked. So we'll share a link to that as well as this continues on. Rana, so we're here today to talk about criminalizing dissent in India, and if there's anyone who's been fighting the good fight and pushing the state of India and the bringing awareness to collapsing democratic institutions and just the growing threat to really the growing threat to any activist, human rights activist, journalist, to raise their voice and talk about issues that are presenting itself in India today. It's been you. You've become sort of the face of dissent in India right now. And your piece in the New Yorker, I think, was shed a lot of light on your profile to a global audience. And so I really wanted to start there, just talking about kind of the New Yorker piece and how that came about, and what was that moment for you? And because you've been working for years trying to get your story out.
It was kind of surprising that, I've been working as a journalist since 2005, 2006, and everybody has been familiar with my work, especially in India. And I've been writing for the Washington Post, for the New York Times, and other international publications. But with New Yorker putting the focus firmly on India and on me, I think the kind of attention it got me internationally, and it surprised me that people familiar with the state of affairs in India were not familiar with the kind of investigation that we were doing, the kind of investigation I was doing at Tehelka, that I was responsible for sending Amit Shah, who's now the Home Minister of country, behind bars in 2010. So that really shed the attention, turned the attention of the world towards India, as it rightly should have been. So basically what happened is Dexter Filkins, who's one of the he's one of the finest journalists across the world. He was trying to reach out to me. He reached out to me on Facebook, Instagram, every possible platform that he could. And he'd already also sent me 2 mails, which I completely ignored because I did not realize what it was. And I'm kind of exhausted with answering emails. And, there's so many people who write to me. So it was I think I just overlooked it. Then finally, a writer friend of mine in London said, this is something that you must certainly do because it's important that the story of India needs to, be told. And then Dexter Filkins came to India, and then he spoke to my family. He spent days around my apartment. He booked a hotel close to where I stay. He spent a lot of time with my family, my parents, with me, traveling to places where I went to. And this was the time the special act was revoked in Kashmir. And so I sneaked Dexter in Kashmir because this was a time when no foreign journalists, even now, foreign journalists are not allowed access in Kashmir. So I sneaked Dexter in. He was like the Gora that kind of looked very Kashmiri. And I made him, wear a scarf and a skull cap and glasses. And I asked him to keep coughing throughout this exit from the airport. So I sneaked him in, and he witnessed my reporting on Kashmir, and he witnessed the human rights abuses firsthand while I reported that. And I think that story was so important, and that it had to be seen from the lens of somebody from a distance, not from somebody who was right there in the midst of rapidly unfolding events, somebody who belonged here, but from somebody who could watch things from a distance and watch India's decline into this majoritarian abyss. So Dexter spoke about my journey, for the fact that I was a cripple, that I was born with a polio, and I couldn't walk. I didn't have friends. To the fact that when I was 9-year-old, the anti-Muslim carnage took place in all over India right after the Babri demolition, and how I became and my family became a Muslim overnight in a cosmopolitan society of only Hindu families. We were the only Muslim family, and my father was considered the Guruji in the area because he was a government school teacher. And sometime around 7th or 8th December 1992, people who we knew as our friends, they barged into our house to pick me and my sister for gang rape. And a Sikh family, Mr. Bagga, who was our next door neighbor, he risked his life, put us on a scooter. And I remember we were taken to a Sikh housing society in Chakala. And so a Sikh family kept us in their house for about 3 months. And I remember when the dust settled, I asked him, I said, Bagga, my father asked Mr. Bagga, why did you do this? He literally put his life on fire, life out there for us. And he said, sir, he used the Hindi word for injustice. Sir, aapne zulm hote hue nahi dekha, humne dekha hai. Jo humne pehle dekha tha, you are witnessing it now. So it felt familiar. And so Dexter wrote about it. He wrote about me going to Gujarat at the age of 19 to do relief work with a Hindu identity, and seeing the carnage firsthand, and then becoming a journalist by to basically I used to think of myself as a weak human, somebody who was born with a polio, somebody who had seen so much discrimination. There were too many scars, and journalism helped me heal those scars. And I think it became a moral responsibility for me to speak out for those who could not speak for themselves, to speak out for the oppressed. And the fact that I got evidence against Amit Shah in 2010, and he went behind bars for because of my investigation, the first serving Minister of State for Home to go behind bars. I was 26 then, and the way my life changed after that investigation, and the death threats that I've been getting, that I had to change 40 to 60 SIM cards in 1 year just to protect myself. So that's a story I think the Western world needed to hear, because through my journey as a journalist and a human, they managed to track the journey of India into a majoritarian state. And that's what made the New Yorker story so special, and something that really shook up the international community, and kind of they were I think they knew what was happening in India, but they did not realize the intensity of the problem that the world's largest democracy was going down under. So I think that was the moment. I think the New Yorker piece was a big shot in the arm for so many like us. And I'm not the only one. I mean, of course, I've unfortunately become the face of the dissent like many others, like my friend Prashant Bhushan. There are many in India who are fighting an unpopular battle, a very, very unpopular battle, and there are not many allies. So that's where we are.
I think that brings a really good point, and I think a good leeway into the deeper conversation as minorities. And you share that story of Bug Uncle, who saved your family, and used when talking about it, says, "Well, we went through this as well."
Yeah.
What does that say about the place of minorities in an increasing majoritarian state under the BJP? And I guess the second question there, because the Sikh story was a lot of the injustices that we face was at the hands of the Congress Party, which would otherwise be seen as a liberal secular party.
Absolutely.
So I guess there's 2 parts to this question. Like, what does it say about the minority experience in a majoritarian state, and why is it difficult for minorities to be able to speak without being seen as a threat? And what does that say about the BJP in Congress and like the political state in India right now as it looks at dissent in the state?
I think the BJP and the Congress are kind of mirror images of each other when it comes to treating the minorities. I mean, we outrage about Narendra Modi being the Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi being made Prime Minister despite the 2002 carnage. But many liberals and intellectuals fail to outrage, fail to show a similar outrage when a Kamal Nath is made a chief minister by the Congress, kind of, rubbing salt on the wounds of so many, of an entire community, that saw the brutal hate that was unleashed on them. Muslims and Sikhs have a lot in common, like other minorities in the country, because we have seen hate enabled by those in power. We have been witness to pogroms and genocide in the country, where we have not been given the right to speak about our oppression. It's like, for instance, the Muslim problem. Uh, like I always say, the oppressors in India like always want to tell the oppressed the language of oppression. It's like, we will tell you what oppression feels like. In Delhi, when the carnage happened this year, everybody, a lot of my friends kept on calling it, riot, and Hindu-Muslim riot, and Hindu-Muslim clash. And it just really angered me. And I went on the Farid Zakaria show, and a lot of my journalist friends were outraged when I called it an anti-Muslim carnage. That language, the terminology that liberals and journalists have used in India, and the same goes with the Sikh community. What happened in 1984, the refusal to call it a genocide, for me is the biggest problem. At my book launch in 2016, at the book launch of Gujarat Files, I remember Indra Jaising said something very significant, that if 1984 was given justice, 1993 would not have happened. If 1993 was given justice, 2002 would not have happened, and so on and so forth. It's a cycle of injustice that Sikhs and Muslims have witnessed in this country. They have witnessed what it feels to be a minority in a majoritarian regime. As far as Mr. Bagga is concerned, I think, when these rioters came to our house and they put the posters of Chalo Ayodhya 6 December, Mr. Bagga could see that happening, because this is exactly how it panned out in Delhi. He could see the build-up. It was all too familiar. When members of the Gandhi family gave not so subtle speeches to provoke the audiences, and the same modus operandi was repeated in Gujarat. It was repeated in Maharashtra, where leaders in power enabled the majority to feel the victim in their own country and fuel the hate against minorities. So Sikhs and Muslims understand each other's pain, as much as there is an effort by the BJP regime to kind of create a schism between the two communities, drawing, historical injustices to kind of, create divisions. But at this point in time in India, Sikhs, Muslims, Dalits, Christians understand the pain of being a minority. It's a nightmare to be a minority in India. Whether it was Rajiv Gandhi, whether it is Kamal Nath, whether it is Jagdish Titler, whether it is Narendra Modi, whether it is Amit Shah, they're all complicit of the same criminality. And this is where intellectuals and human rights activists and journalists come in place. They must understand that history is kind and objective and scathing in its observation. And history will judge all those who are writing this history. So they must understand that they will be held to account tomorrow if they misrepresent facts. What is happening in Modi's India is that facts are being distorted and misrepresented to kind of give a distorted vision of a democratic India.
So if we look at the state that you just described, and we look at minorities within India today, what's their recourse? If we look at the ability of minorities to express issues within government, to express the injustice or oppressions they're facing at the hands of the state, they are either labeled as ISI agents, they're labeled as paid by the Chinese regime, they're labeled as international, they're labeled all these things, and even worse, they get picked up by. We've been seeing the increasingly use of the UAPA in Punjab and elsewhere to crack down on human rights advocates. What's the recourse for minorities who are trying to express issues with the state of India as it exists today?
For the longest time, I think we have believed that the recourse lies in the legal system, within the legal system and our judiciary and our institutions. But in the last 6 years, we have seen the institutions kind of crumble under pressure. And this is not new. This has happened under fascist regimes in India. It's a repeat of everything that has happened in the past. We saw when the 93 carnage took place, there was a Sri Krishna commission that was formed to look into the Mumbai carnage. the committee gave its report and indicted some of the top BJP and Shiv Sena leaders, and it was a Congress regime that could not give them justice. It was the Congress in power. It was not the BJP in power. So for the longest time, the Supreme Court of India used to be the CBI, the agencies that would dispense justice. We used to look up to them to dispense justice to us. The Supreme Court of India in 2004 called Narendra Modi a modern day Nero who looked the other way as innocent women and children were being butchered. And then you see the Supreme Court of India develop amnesia, not just over the past, but about the way justice needs to be delivered. So for the longest time, minorities have, reposed their faith in the judiciary. At this point of time, the only recourse is well-meaning people. And I say that knowing and being fully aware of the recourses available to us. I think we only have ourselves to stand by and our solidarity, because you saw what happened with Prashant Bhushan. He put out a couple of tweets exposing a certain member of the Supreme Court, and now for the first time in Indian history, there is a case against him, and he could be sentenced on the 20th of August by Justice Arun Mishra for just 2 tweets, which point out to the criminality by those who are supposed to dispense justice. I'll give a small example, because Justice Arun Mishra is supposed to, deliver the sentence, the sentencing, and the whatever happens in 20th August. Justice Arun Mishra, when Prashant Bhushan asked to reinvestigate the case of the murder of Haren Pandya, who was the Home Minister under Narendra Modi, who had differences with him, and he was murdered. And till date, there is no clarity on it. So Mr. Prashant Bhushan filed a petition in the Supreme Court citing my book, Gujarat Files as evidence. Justice Arun Mishra gives a judgment saying my book is full of loopholes, it cannot be considered evidence, etc., etc., etc. Completely ripped my book apart in pieces. Towards the end of the judgment, the same justice says that he has not read the book. And you're talking about the judiciary, for heaven's sake. And what do you expect from that court to give justice? I mean, these are the people you're talking about here, whether it's Prashant Bhushan or me or other activists and journalists. These are public figures. They have a support base. Think of the person who does not have the kind of support base, who does not have our privilege, who does not have the popularity. If that person turns up to the Supreme Court of India or the High Courts of India for justice, what happens? You see what happens to Pragya Thakur. I remember in 2008, the day Hemant Karkare was martyred in the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. I met him. I was the last person he spoke to. And he spoke about the rise of Hindu fundamentalism and the involvement of Pragya Thakur in the Maligaon blasts and their involvement in many terror cases in India. And when 26/11 happened, Indians labeled Hemant Karkare as a martyr. And today, Pragya Thakur sits in the Indian Parliament, not just that, on a defense panel. Where is the Supreme Court of India? Where are our courts? So who do you seek justice from? When everything around is compromised, who do you seek justice from? So we kind of look up to people who are now fighting the good fight, who are now fighting the unpopular fight. So these are the people we look up to, because we do not have any recourse. If this is how the Supreme Court of India acts, who do we turn to? So we have ourselves to kind of stand by each other.
So when we talk about democracies and strong democracies in the Indian state, and folks that speak about it love to say that it's the world's largest democracy, which maybe on paper is true. But when we talk about institutions that uphold democracy, courts are an integral part of it. And I think you highlighted a lot of the issues that exist within the court system, the justice system, which even if it does find justice, it takes years. And even then, because of the heroic efforts of folks like H.S. Fulka, in the case of 1984. And that's heroic after 30 years. Yeah. But another key institution, key pillar, one that you spent a lot of time talking about and has been slowly been more and more exposed is media and the role that journalists play in shedding light when no one else can. Free media is like an integral part of any democracy. But we're seeing criminalization of dissent, or even fact-finding or writing from journalists, or even self-policing of journalists in India. So there's a recent RSF, Journalism Without Borders report World Freedom Index of journalism, and India's ranked really close to the bottom, probably one of the lowest
Yeah.
ranked democracies.
Yeah.
What does that say about media and its complicity in all this, or even when they are trying, that they're cracked down on by the state?
I have never been more disappointed in my 15 years of journalism. I don't see a media that is so craven, that is so driven by its axis of politicians, that it chooses to look the other way when crimes are being committed. I remember L.K. Advani said during the emergency, when asked to bend, they crawled. In India, at this point of time, they have not even been asked to bend, and they're prostrating. They're prostrating before the powers that be. Well-meaning journalists. I can give you an example of the day the Ayodhya stone, the foundation. Mr. Modi was laying the foundation stone at Ayodhya. Journalists and well-meaning journalists who covered the demolition of the Babri Masjid, secular journalists and intellectuals, stood outside that space eating pani puri and golgappa and talking about the new Ayodhya and the development in Ayodhya. And you look at them, and there was a nausea that you felt, about being a part of this fraternity that loves to develop amnesia. This is a fraternity that will look the other way when a Kamal Nath is being made the chief minister despite his complicity in the 84 genocide. This is the media that will completely develop amnesia over Amit Shah's past, over the fact that he went behind bars for the extrajudicial murder of Muslims. It is a media that believes in drawing false equivalence and does not believe in calling a spade a spade. I've never seen, look at what's happening in the media in the last 3 weeks. We are seeing the worst kind of starvation. We are seeing farmer suicides. But every day you have a Sushant Singh Rajput suicide story. And every day there is a trial by media. Every news anchor is a jurist. Every news anchor is an IB official. Every news anchor is a detective. While the real stories go uncovered. I have never been more disgusted. Whether the media now, especially under Modi, likes these labels, labeling Sikhs as terrorists, not using the word alleged, but just labeling them as terrorists. There have been many Sikh youth who are disappeared in Punjab over the last couple of years. They have been booked under terror charges, under UAPA specifically. There are Muslim youth who have been picked up and detained, especially in Kashmir. And when the special status to Kashmir was revoked last year in this time, and hundreds of children were disappeared, which is very common in Kashmir. Media in Kashmir was standing outside the Dal Lake with an apple in their hand, talking about normalcy and talking about the famed red apple in Kashmir. So that speaks volumes. I think the media has disgraced itself, and you don't feel like associating yourself with the profession, anymore. With the Indian media anymore. And one of the reasons why I stopped going on Indian television debates is because they would get you, and that they would get a right-wing bigot and kind of make it a level playing field where they draw false equivalence between your truth and his truth. There's this false whataboutery, this both sidism that's killing the media, much like their Western counterparts. But there is some semblance of sanity in the Western media. Indian media has lost that semblance of sanity. There's no pretense anymore. Everything is what you see. It's a brazen contempt for journalistic ethics.
So where's the hope there? If there's no truth-telling happening at the journalist level, at the media level, what's the space for independent media there in India right now, or what's the solution?
I see some really, really young, bright journalists in India who are not editors, who are not CEOs. These are bright young journalists in breakout organizations, in organizations like Scroll, Caravan, Wire, young journalists who are out there, telling stories that should be told. These are not journalists who get the biggest journalism award. These are not journalists who love seeing their faces on television. There is hope. There is amidst all this doom and gloom, there are also these voices that make so much sense. For instance, two of Caravan's journalists. Caravan is a leading publication in India. Their journalists were attacked this week because they went to report on the anti-Muslim riots in New Delhi, and they were attacked, and one of the journalists was sexually harassed, and they're still speaking the truth. So, so besides this world of journalists and 9 p.m. prime time anchor, there are also these well-meaning journalists who are speaking truth to power every day. So I have placed my faith in them because, unfortunately, I'm not a pessimist. Of course, these are the times that we live in. These are very dark and depressing times, but I've chosen optimism and trying to see a glimmer of hope in these young voices, in these young activists, in this human rights activists like Prashant Bhushan and the hundreds of activists who are now in Indian jails like Sudha Bhardwaj. These are people who are fighting for us, who are fighting. This fight is as big as the Indian freedom struggle. They are now fighting for India to continue being a democracy and not slip into a fascist Hindu state. So yes, there are well-meaning people who are fighting the good fight on our behalf.
When we talk about independent media or activists or advocates speaking out and expressing that dissent and putting a mirror up against the state and some of the atrocities or human rights violations, or the growing, as you just mentioned, the Hindutva movement or the Hindu Rashtra movement as being led by the BJP, normally that platform would have been social media. It would have been Twitter, it would be Facebook, which would otherwise be seen as like democratized spaces to speak without gatekeepers. But just yesterday, we saw news from the Wall Street Journal talking about Facebook not actively cracking down on hate speech from leaders from the BJP and actually cracking down on dissent in cases as well. Where is the space for these conversations to happen right now in India without it being criminalized or silenced?
I think the biggest stories about whether it's Facebook or social media and them enabling fascist regimes are not being told in India, but international media. You saw what happened in Kashmir last year. Some of the bravest and most courageous reportage came from the BBC, came from Wall Street Journal, came from the Washington Post and New York Times. So I think, fortunately, unfortunately, the international media has been a big support for us. Can you imagine? I have been jobless since 2013 November, since I quit Tehelka. Till last year when Washington Post employed me as its global opinions writer. And I remember many journalism organizations calling me with a job offer. And these are well-meaning friends and editors. And they would say, and I have been a part of many such interviews, and they said, Rana, you're doing so well. You have such great sources. But, now you should leave the BJP and let's talk about the Congress. And, you should let's forget about Modi and Amit Shah. Let's focus more on the Congress stories. And I remember I looked at this editor in 2015, I think, and this editor was giving me an offer. He was giving me a big package, and he said, stick to Congress right now. Stick to Muslim leaders. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not into pimping yet. You want me to pimp? You want me to pimp stories for you? So the fact that I was given some of the biggest investigative journalism awards, and I was jobless for 5 years. And that a Washington Post hired me speaks volumes of Indian journalism. When I released Gujarat Files in 2016, it was a self-published book. All the publishers started publishing my book. And at the book launch, every editor, every political leader was at my book launch. They gave me a standing ovation. Next day, there was absolute silence. All the journalist and editor friends who would meet me for coffee outside started calling me home. That's how scared and intimidated we are by the regime. We refuse to see, and the excuse that they often give to me is like, Rana, you don't have a family to look after, you don't have children, we have families, we have loans to pay. And my answer to them is, listen, if you had loans to pay, why journalism? You could have joined any kind of organization. You could have joined the private sector. Why join journalism? So I think at this point of time, my hope lies with the international community. There have been, and where Facebook is concerned, I've written so often and I've spoken so often. When Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook, I remember when Modi visited the Facebook headquarters, she changed her display picture to Narendra Modi. Facebook has been an enabler of fascist regimes across the world, whether it's what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening to the Rohingyas, what's happening in Philippines, what's happening in India, what's happening in America. So, I'll give you an example. On Facebook, you can amplify your story or amplify your post by kind of advertising it or by paying a small amount of money. Um, I remember each time I amplified a Modi story, the ad would be rejected by Facebook every time, and that's not my experience. Caravan put out a story that when it tried to amplify its investigations against Modi and Shah, Facebook would Facebook would just remove the post, and not just Facebook. Look at what's happening in Twitter. The kind of hate that I'm subjected to, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, I report each one of them. I mean, they morphed my image on a porn video in 2018. And this was on Facebook, this was on Twitter. This image was posted on the pages of BJP leaders and with a blue tick. And these pages were not removed. So it took a Wall Street Journal to write this story. It wasn't in the Indian Express. It wasn't in the Times of India. It took a Wall Street Journal to write the story. It's impossible if an Indian journalist tells me that they did not have access to that story. Everybody knows the story. Nobody has the courage to tell that story, which is why you have the Wall Street Journal, which is why you have the New York Times telling those brave stories. I know Indian journalists keep comparing themselves to American journalists, saying, we are doing, even journalists in America are doing. I'm sorry. Journalists in America are calling out Donald Trump day in, day out. Indian journalists treat Modi as some kind of that placed Modi on a pedestal. Somebody who needs to be worshipped every morning. They do not have the courage to even write one critical word of him. I don't expect justice. I don't expect them to speak for the marginalized in India. And which is why we see what's happening with Facebook and social media and Twitter. The kind of hate that is extended towards us. I mean, I put a tweet. Even if I put a full stop, there will be like 1,000 responses, threatening me with rape and murder. And the fact that Twitter just is a mute spectator. When my image was morphed on a porn video 2 years ago, and I went to NDTV did this program about how Facebook and Twitter are enabling hate. The BJP spokesperson came on television and said, if you go out in the rain, you expect to be drenched. I mean, he's legitimizing that hate on national television, and nobody talks about it.
And that's scary, right? Like, so we talked about like the crumbling, lack of trust on the court system. You have the media, the pillar, the critical pillar in upholding any kind of democratic society or state, or to hold the regime's feet to fire, aiding and abetting the state rather than shining a light on it. What does that say then about dissent in India today, where you are seeing it criminalized, you're seeing it silenced? Does it really present a state that's kind of moving away from democratic principles towards more authoritarian ones, where any truth spoken or any criticism is seen as a threat to the nation, rather than seen as something that needs to be discussed and really fleshed out as a community?
I think we have already passed the stage of being a country which allows dissent as a form of democracy. I think dissent has now become a criminal act. I think it won't be, I mean, what happened with Prashant Bhushan? What was a dissenting act? He was punished, his tweets, he was criminalized for speaking the truth. Now, that's not just about Prashant Bhushan. They have set an example. What they did to Prashant Bhushan was to set an example that if we can do this to him, we can do this to you. You are not safe. You can live in America, you can live in Canada, you can still be penalized for putting out a tweet. So, when I go to different countries and I give lectures and people say, what can we do? But we don't want to speak about, what's happening in India. We have moved to this country. All I need to say to each one of you who's listening to this from Canada or any other part of the world, today they've come for us, tomorrow they'll come for you. It's not, if you don't stand up and speak up for those who are suffering in India, for the marginalized, tomorrow they'll come for you irrespective. We have seen that happening. We have not had each other's back, which is why dissent is being criminalized in India. Each time I speak on any forum, on any platform, right now I'm speaking to you, I have to worry about the consequence. God knows what will be recorded by what minister in the government and what could be held against me. And that's true for everybody. I still consider myself a privileged person because I have the privilege of not being arrested. But as we speak, hundreds and thousands in India are being repressed. You saw the Bhima Koregaon case wherein hundreds of activists in India are being jailed for allegedly conspiring to kill the prime minister, and the evidence is just laughable. You know, you have activists actually carrying letters in their pockets when they're arrested that, hey, we were going to assassinate the prime minister. And this is not something that the BJP, it's not something that, you know, one can only blame the BJP for. We have to understand who brought in the UAPA. The Congress regime. It was the Congress that brought in and sanctioned the most draconian terror acts. What you see I see some Congress leaders writing great op-eds about using UAPA to criminalize dissent. I'm sorry, but what were you doing when you were in power? I remember doing this cover story on Dalit boys in Maharashtra in 2012 who were arrested for reading Ambedkar and Karl Marx. And that literature was called seditious literature. So what we see is history repeating itself, which is why Congress and BJP are mirror images of each other. Nobody likes dissent. Of course, Narendra Modi is a notch above everything that we have seen in the past. What was happening during the Congress was happening in a more covert manner. Now it is being brazened out. Now even a tweet can send you behind bars. Now a cartoon on a Facebook page can send you behind bars. The country has built this image of the 82% Hindu majority as a victim in their own country, which is not tolerant to anything that goes against their whims, and that becomes a criminal act. So what I keep speaking right now is dissent is criminal for the Indian government. I have the privilege of being a global opinions writer with the Washington Post. Perhaps that's something that could save me. But the conversation that we are having right now, if I were to write this on Twitter, or if this could be a criminal offense for many in India right now. Indian minorities are living in fear. A lot of my friends have stopped writing anything on their Facebook page for fear of being arrested. You don't know what offends the government anymore.
So what's the outlet for folks that do want to express dissent, that do want to hold institutions to task, that do want to speak on these topics? What is the platform? What is the outlet that exists today in the regime in India with the regime that's currently in place?
Unfortunately, there is no outlet, which is why a lot of my well-meaning friends are leaving the country, saying, we are sending our kids abroad or we are leaving the country. Again, that's a position of privilege. How many in India would afford sending their kids abroad so that they can just speak their mind? We are celebrating Rabindranath Tagore. We are celebrating freedom fighters on a day which also happens to be the Independence Day of India. We didn't plan this. For all those who are watching this, we didn't plan this to happen on Independence Day. It just happened to be Independence Day. I think we have never been more caged than we are today. India has never been, it's not a free country today. And those who are looking for outlets, well, you have to be privileged enough to speak up or speak out. I don't think there is an outlet for anybody, which is why when there was so much repressed anger amongst India's youth, which is why we saw the Shaheen Bagh movement in India in December, January, which is why we saw the anti-CA protest in a city like Bombay. I've lived in Bombay all my life. I've never seen more than 100 people gather for a protest. You saw thousands of people, getting, coming together to protest against what did not directly affect them, but there was a tipping point. I think that was a tipping point for Indians as a democracy. Some of my friends who are affiliated, who also worked for the BJP, but they came out and protesting against the CA because they felt something was, Modi had crossed that line which should not have been crossed. So these protests, whether it is Shaheen Bagh, whether it is the anti-CA protests which are happening across the country, the protests at Jamia, JNU, I saw people who had nothing to do with activism, nothing to do with these student movements. They were joining and standing there with a candle. They felt cathartic doing that. It felt cathartic because all you were doing is sitting at home, watching Republic, watching Times Now, watching them expose their bigotry day in, day out, and just be mute spectators. And the pandemic has come in handy for Modi and Amit Shah, like all fascist regimes across the world, like all authoritarian regimes across the world, to unleash their majoritarian agenda by silencing dissent. by arresting almost every person who organized a protest during the anti-CAA movement. Some of the finest minds in India, some of our finest student leaders, whether it's from Jamia, JNU, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, they're all being arrested every day, one by one. Student activists who organize the Shaheen Bagh protest are behind bars. They are being, they are being beaten up, and so this is a signal to them. The government saw dissent being normalized in India during the anti-CA protest. They used the pandemic to stifle those voices, to nip it in the bud. So I do hope that when things get better, people of this country and people abroad all over the world, well-meaning people, can rise up again. Because fascism cannot continue. Fascism cannot continue forever. Historically, we have witnessed that fascism has to be defeated by well-meaning people. They do not have to be people in political systems. They do not have to be politicians. They don't have to be leaders. They just have to be well-meaning people who understand, empathize with each other, and understand the language of injustice. We need to all come together, which is why right now we are talking to each other in the midst of this pandemic, which is why we are doing this webinar, we are doing this Zoom call, because we realize it's important for us to speak more than ever before on this.
So it was the demonstration against CEA, was that type of dissent, was that a flash in the pan, or does that come back in a post-COVID situation?
It will become a flash in the pan moment if the government, which has already arrested some of the finest minds, if that has managed to intimidate India's activists and India's students and India's youth, and it has intimidated them, then it will end up being a flash in the pan moment for India. But if our anger, if our outrage was legit, if it came from a good space, then I think post-COVID, all of us will reconnect with each other. All of us need to remind each other of the fight that we were fighting. You know, if you look at the arrests that the government is making, and I was in Delhi about a month ago to basically piece together how, the Delhi carnage took place. And the government has systematically arrested everybody who had a voice during the anti-CA protest, anybody who had a semblance of being a leader. There were a 20-year-old student from Aligarh Muslim University, a 19-year-old from JNU, Safura Zargar, who was pregnant. Anybody who could speak, who could galvanize a crowd, has been put behind bars in an attempt to signal others that this is what we do to people who speak up. So if you speak up again tomorrow, you will meet the same fate. But I think what the government has done is given us young leaders, because out of fascism, out of dictatorial regimes like this, we get young leaders. Our young leaders are not those we see on television. Our young leaders, our young politicians and the future of India are those who are behind bars at the moment, who are willing to risk everything to sustain India's democratic institutions, to sustain India's democratic interest. And these are the people I have great faith in. And this is where my optimism stems from. I see young minds, I see young student activists, I see middle-class Indians fighting for something they believe in, speaking up despite the cost of speaking up. And it's a very small number. But we have seen in history that it's always a small number of people who have led a revolution, who have brought about a revolution. And I have faith in that small number of people. I think that will, if we stand together, if we stand by each other, if we have each other's back, if we stand in solidarity, there will be a day when the fascists will be thrown out from our country and from everywhere, all the same spaces that the world has seen.
Yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts on, when we look at India today, there's two states that have a majority non-Hindu population. One is Kashmir, which is now in total lockdown and still silenced, again, shockingly in a democratic country. And the other is Punjab, with the Sikh population. And we have seen the Akal Takht and the temporal seat of Sikh authority speak out against the RSS. We've seen it speak out against the UAPA. We've seen it speak out against CAA. We've seen it speak out against what's happening in Kashmir. I'm curious as to your thoughts as a Muslim woman outside of Punjab looking towards the state or Sikhs. And what do you think our place is in this conversation and pushing dissent, or pushing again, shining a light on the regime?
I remember doing a series of lectures in Punjab University, in Jalandhar, in Ludhiana, and in Amritsar, and various other places in Punjab. And I can tell you that the maximum number of participants I have had in any debate or lecture have been in Punjab. There is a resilience that Punjabis are showing towards this fascism. Even if it's a Congress regime, I think the leaders of the Congress borrow their nationalism from the Hindu right-wing scheme of things. The leadership in Punjab right now have been co-opted by the regime and by Hindu nationalists. But there is a great sense of resilience on college campuses. People in universities, people, activists who are bringing together Punjabi and Sikh activists specifically, who have organized so many events for me for Gujarat Files. I remember when my book was translated into Punjabi, and I had an event, I think, somewhere in Chandigarh, and I just looked at the audience. It was massive. And I was wondering, why would they do that? I mean, what has this fight got to do with them? This is about Gujarat. This is about a Muslim girl. This is about her fight. This is about her family and her, her understanding of fascism. Why are these Punjabi youth, all consolidating and speaking? And then I realized that there was a frustration. There was the same frustration that they are seeing among the Muslim and Dalit youth in the country. Just because these are not people in power does not mean they do not exist. And I was I think it was very liberating to see these Punjabi youth everywhere, Sikh youth everywhere. After every book reading of mine, they would say, "Why Guruji da Khalsa, why Guruji di Fateh," and felt like a personal victory for me. It felt like, we are in this cause because we believe in the idea of justice. So there are spaces like that. Even if the regime is, I think the regime in Punjab is as complicit as, say, any BJP regime. What's happening when I was in Kashmir, there was this pocket where I went to cover there was this house from which 3 youngsters were picked up. And this is also the neighborhood that had maximum Sikh families. So the Kashmiri Muslim families and the Sikh families coexisted. And when the lockdown happened, I saw that, it's injustice identifies injustice, understands injustice like nothing else. They empathize with each other. Kashmir, the government is scared of Kashmir, and the government is scared of the state of Punjab, because these are youth which do not allow themselves to be defined by the nationalism identified by this country as true nationalism. These are people who have understood what liberty means, what equality means, and a government and a regime that is dictatorial does not like a population that is well aware of its rights and that is well aware of the fight against injustice. So that's a similarity I see between Punjab and Kashmir. These are 2 states with a majority of Sikh and Muslims, which is why you see the attack on them using draconian terror charges, because that's the only way you stifle their voice. That's the only way you silence them. The supremacy that, and which means the government is scared of these states. You accuse them. And what is the common case that you build up against Kashmiris and Punjabis? That of terrorism. A person who speaks for his or her rights, is well aware of his or her rights, immediately becomes a person who is a threat to the state. How do you define sedition in the present day India? Sedition in present day India is an individual who is well aware of his rights and who wants to seek recourse and who wants to get justice and who wants to get equal rights for himself or herself. That's sedition in present day India. And I won't be surprised that the maximum number of cases against sedition are in Punjab and Kashmir, because the maximum number of seditious youth happen to be in these 2 states.
I think it's an honor that the youth of both states will hold very high.
Absolutely.
I know you're fighting a bug, so let me know if you want to kind of wind this down. We still have
I
a
could
bit of
take a few
time.
questions.
Okay.
Questions.
I've been incorporating questions as they come in and what I've been sharing with you.
Right.
There's one theme that's been kind of asked here is, well, there's two questions. So I'll start with this just because we're still on the topic of Punjab and Kashmir.
Yeah.
I remember the recent state elections in Punjab. There was considerable amount of hype around the Aam Aadmi Party, and considerable amount of
Yeah.
conversation was up as a third front, very much because of the frustration with Congress, with the BJP, and at the time also with the Akali Party.
Yeah.
And that the AOP was maybe a solution here as like renewal or to bring in a change within the democratic society or within the regimes of India. I think that has maybe faltered a little bit over time in Punjab and elsewhere probably. So my question to you is, do you see a solution here in kind of changing Indian society or changing the democracy or changing the state and how it treats minorities through political means? Like, is it with a third front? Is it with a new political party? Or is this the system so corrupt that it just won't happen?
I would have allowed pessimism to cloud my statement here, because there is an atmosphere of pessimism, because what you saw in the Aam Aadmi Party was a hope away from the Congress and the BJP, which have mirrored each other over decades, and you thought that the Aam Aadmi Party really stood for a fresh era of politics that has not been seen in the past, whose ideology is clean, which is anti-corruption. But over the years, I think the biggest disappointment has been the Aam Aadmi Party for its refusal to speak up against the injustices being done by the fascist regime. Whether it was the Delhi carnage, whether it was what happened in Kashmir, this newfound nationalism of the Aam Aadmi Party, I think it's no different from the politics of the Congress and the BJP, which is why it's kind of it kind of brings up the question is, who do we turn to? And for me, the answer is, at this point of time, there are student leaders across the country who are affiliated with various student movements. There are political outfits. I'm not sure if a third front will be, because I don't think any government in India, if it's a third front government, whether if it's a Maya, this government has a way of kind of stifling any third front formation by, whether it's a Trinamool Congress or DMK-led government or any, because it has multiple cases and multiple files of these people, and it can always bring them up. I think my hope lies in these. I think it's going to be a long time before this actually materializes. But these student leaders who we are seeing right now, who are not self-centered, who are not egoistical, they are in jails in thousands. But once they're out, I see there isn't any cohesive force right now to bring them together. But as in the next few years, I think this fascism that has been unleashed on us will throw up leaders who we can look up to. At this point of time where we stand, I don't see anyone. I'll have to be honest. I don't see anyone. There is, there are certain student activists who I see hope in, and I hope for the good, for a democratic India, for a secular India, that these young leaders come together from Punjab, from Kashmir, from Maharashtra, from Kerala. You saw what's happening. I mean, Kerala is a good example. You see what's happening in Kerala. They have seen landslides in the past 1 week. They have seen an air crash. It's the only state which has managed to crush the pandemic. And one of the big reasons is the state is still one of the more secular states in the country, which gives the democratic and civil rights to its citizens. So that for me is there's a ray of optimism. But I would still believe in the youth of this country, and I hope that in the next few years they come together to foment something which will bring about a real change. I don't have, at this point in time where things stand, I don't have hope in the Congress or the BJP or the Aam Aadmi Party to actually let India continue to be a democracy as we vision it.
And this may be the last question, but again, bearing on how you feel,
Yeah.
the Dalits of India have been increasingly fighting the system, have increasingly fighting a regime that is systematically discriminated against them, have held them down, have taken away their opportunities to grow.
Yeah.
What's the Dalit struggle in India right now, and how does that play into dissent, and how does that play into these conversations that we're having today? Because they're cracked down harder on than anyone else almost.
Absolutely. Dalits have seen what's happening to Muslims and Sikhs right now more than anybody else, and much, much before this really kind of mainstreamed itself. I remember as a young journalist when when I went to Kerlanji, which is this Dalit pocket in Maharashtra, a Dalit girl was raped, and her body was chopped, and she was thrown near the river for speaking up uh, against a Brahmin in her village. And Dalits in India have seen decades of oppression. At this point of time, and if you see across the series of communal riots that have took place in India, there the BJP government and the Congress regime have always used Dalits as the foot soldiers to use and throw, to give them as for instance, when I was doing Gujarat files and I was undercover and I was interviewing these officers who basically did the dirty work of killing minority students, and they were all Dalits. And there was a pattern because the Brahmins do not like to do the dirty work themselves, and because Dalits have seen decades of oppression, they make them do this so that they can give them a position of power which otherwise eludes them. So the Dalits have been systematically misused by the regime to give them their lost dignity at the cost of making them do these dirty things during, especially what they make them do during the carnage. The officers in whether it was the Gujarat riots or the Mumbai riots, who were made to do the dirty job for the Brahmanical, high level officers, were Dalits. But I think Muslims and Sikhs need to understand the fight for justice from the Dalits, because Dalits have used their voice, their poetry, their literature, their art to speak up. There are so many Dalit revolutionary poets from Maharashtra, from Punjab, who have used their literature to express themselves. And that is something we need to learn from Dalits. Muslims and Christians and Sikhs in India need to come together with the Dalits to form something, to come together, because we have all seen decades of oppression. What's happened, it's like there was a Twitter hashtag the other day, eat with a Dalit. It felt so humiliating. What does that even mean? What does that even mean to eat with a Dalit? You're already putting yourself in a position of privilege when you're saying eat with a Dalit or be friends with a Dalit. That it's the fact that we are so prejudiced and it's so entrenched. This caste system is so entrenched in India. It's like they unconsciously do something, and then they realize that, oh my God, we're speaking from a position of privilege. The films that are made in India on Dalit rights, unfortunately, are made by the upper class. It's always the upper class that is speaking for Dalits. Because they always say, let us speak for you. You don't speak, we will speak for you. It's like the Muslims. When Muslims in India speak up for themselves, they're told, hey, we are speaking for you. Why are you speaking for yourself? Nobody likes a Dalit speaking for herself. Nobody likes a Dalit who is well aware of her rights, because that Dalit then becomes the enemy of the state, which is what happened in the Congress regime. UAPA was specifically used against Dalit activists by saying that the Kabir Sangeet Academy was formed, the Kala Academy was formed by Dalits. The government's first target was the Dalits because they became a threat to the state. So I think Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians should understand the struggle from Dalits, because nobody knows the fight better than them.
I guess in that same light, if I can ask you one more question, if you can
Sure.
give me enough indulgence to ask you one more question.
Please do.
This is invigorating. This is a great conversation. I think your insights are phenomenal. In America and in Canada and the West in general, we've been seeing an increasing conversation around Black Lives Matter, especially after George Floyd's death and what that triggered in protests across the country. And there's been lots of groundwork, decades and decades and decades, centuries of groundwork that's been done before this. What's the moment in India where you'll see something similar, where you'll see a mass rising or a mass movement to question and call out, whereas in the West it's white supremacy. In India, it probably Brahmanical supremacy or Hindu supremacy, really that's systemically working against Dalits, working against minorities. When do you see that happening in India? What do you think will be the catalyst?
Well, there have been many moments in India when there could be that could have acted as a catalyst, and you could have seen Dalit lives matter or Muslim lives matter or Sikh lives matter on social media. But unfortunately, the problem with India is that our public voices are ashamed of speaking for our own individual, for our own domestic cause, while they wear this Black Lives Matter as some kind of fashion accessory. So it's kind of fashionable to speak about Black Lives Matter and put like some Indian celebrities did. They painted themselves black and said Black Lives Matter, which of course is so nonsensical to begin with. But the same celebrities, for instance, Priyanka Chopra does, along with her husband, puts out a statement. I know this is going to get me a lot of troll attack. She puts out a statement saying Black Lives Matter. Just 8 years ago, Priyanka Chopra did a film called Fashion, in which she wakes up one morning sleeping right next to a black man, is outraged and goes suicidal and slips into depression. Over the years, this has been normalized. This has kind of, in a way, what, again, look at Indian culture in Hindi films. The main characters of our films always had this Brahminical surname. They were Roys and Kapoors and Malhotras. You never had any lower caste surname in any of those big blockbusters. Till recently, Muslim characters were either supporting characters who would wear those scars and coal in their eyes, or either be the villains. Uh, for a moment, for a moment like Black Lives Matter in India, we need to first begin with understanding our privilege, the majority privilege in India. I mean, last week when a Muslim man on the eve of Bakrid was was lynched on the streets for allegedly carrying beef, and they beat him in public. They recorded the video, and we have seen a spate of lynching since 2014. Indian celebrities will not speak up. They speak up because they believe that it's easier to take a selfie with the prime minister than speaking up for a minority who's lynched in their country. Which is why we do not have a Black Lives Matter movement in India, because our public voices are ashamed of speaking, and they're complicit in aiding and abetting a regime that consistently has been demeaning and marginalizing its minorities. For something like that to happen in India, we need our public voices to be brave enough to put a hashtag out there. Forget a hashtag. Just say solidarity. When Deepika Padukone went to JNU to stand in their press conference where she stood in solidarity with the JNU students, it was a huge moment, because she was a public figure who enjoyed a great deal of adulation. We need heroes in India, and these heroes, unfortunately, in our whether it's our films or whether it's or in our sports, uh, they have the same status as religion in India, Bollywood and cricket. But have we seen a single celebrity from Bollywood or one of our sports icons speak up against what's happening, against the fascism? They won't. They would rather take a selfie with the prime minister and speak up against what's happening, against injustices. So it's going to take a long, long time for something like this to happen in India. We will continue seeing the hypocrisy over Black Lives Matter, that our celebrities will talk about racism in America. I think what's happening in America is what's happening in India is no different from what happened to the blacks in America. And a lot of time I get attacked for saying this, but and of course there is history of racism in America, but what's happening in India is no different. Look at the way there's an apartheid in India right now against Muslims. I went to buy an apartment in Bandra, which is one of the most cosmopolitan societies in Bombay, 3 weeks ago, and I've been looking to get a space for myself, and as it was, the guy was from studied at Harvard, and I loved the house, and I said, would you be, I just want to tell you that I'm Muslim. He said, oh, and the conversation ended just there. So it's going to be, and I can't speak tomorrow if I even speak about it on Twitter. There's nobody who's going to stand in support of me saying, hey, Muslim lives matter. It's going to be a long time before Indians gather the guts to stand up for fellow Indians. who are in a less privileged position. I think we have a lot to learn from America and other countries, and we have a long way to go before we get in that space.
Yeah, just on that same train of thought, like you brought up the Priyanka Chopra example. She
Yeah,
also tweeted out honoring and supporting KPS Gill as the super cop.
absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely.
and there was a frustration in the Sikh community, and that's not the first time or the last time that's going to happen, but there was a frustration in the
No,
Sikh community that does no one in India recognize what our people went through? Like, does no
yeah,
one recognize the disappearances? Does no one recognize the sacrifice of someone like Shaheed Jaswant Singh Kalra? Does no one
absolutely.
recognize the young men that were being picked up and emptied out of our villages for no cause? And there was this grand feeling of just there's no justice for Sikhs in India, and it kind of lends itself to a lot of other conversations around allyship, like who's standing up for us. You know, Sikhs always stand up for others. Who's standing up for us? And I think that feeling also is felt in other smaller communities, right? Like or other minority communities. Like the Dalit community says it all the time as well, rightfully so. Like, no, who's standing up for us? Where do you see allyship, and where do you see folks standing up for one another, and how does that actually happen in India moving forward?
Like I said in the beginning, I think we have only each other to stand by each other. I mean, if a Sikh man disappears in Punjab, why shouldn't the Muslim community not put up a Twitter trend saying Sikh lives matter? You know, why shouldn't Dalits and why shouldn't intellectuals in India start a Twitter hashtag saying Sikh lives matter? What stops them from saying it? I think if we were to stand up and speak up for each other, I think it would lead to a new beginning. It would not be something that would conclude in justice, but it could be a new beginning. Nobody's going to speak for us. Nobody will. You know, we don't expect our celebrities, we don't expect our icons, we don't expect our public figures to speak for us. But I guess it's people like us, common citizens who understand injustice, who understand that a man who comes from Canada to Punjab for a wedding ceremony suddenly disappears and nobody's talking about it in the last 3 years. They have to speak up for these people. I remember when I spoke about, I remember when I came back from Canada and I wrote a Facebook post about Sikh youth who have disappeared from Punjab. And one Muslim man just wrote in a comment, but you know what, that's a different issue altogether. And that's a thing, right? We are so indifferent to each other. We think that is not our issue. That's their issue. We should not speak to them. I think it's now time for us to understand that it's not their issue. It's our issue. It's a collective problem. It's a collective problem of injustice. So Muslims, Sikhs, Dalits, well-meaning Hindus, and we cannot. I keep adding this, that there are well-meaning Hindus who have stood up in their, in our struggle for justice. Whether it is the 84 genocide, whether it's the 92 carnage, whether it is 2002, some of the most well-meaning activists have been from the Hindu community. So it's not that we have to kind of find spaces of solidarity, find well-meaning people from across spectrum, and stop this. I think there is this. We have our own biases. We have to start with our own biases. That why should a Sikh be a part of this discussion that I'm having? Like if Rana Ayyub is having a conversation on something, why should she speak on Sikhs? Or if Hartosh Singh Bal is speaking on disappearances, why should he speak about something that's happening in Kashmir? We have to understand that we are all in this together, and we have to fight this battle together. It's not your or mine fight, it's our fight. And the day we understand, I think that will be the first biggest challenge of a fascist regime to counter this strength. And a fascist regime is always authoritarian regime is always scared of too many victims coming together and fighting in the struggle for justice. We are in this together, and I hope we understand that it's not about the disappeared youth in Kashmir, or it's not about the disappeared youth in Punjab. The families and their struggle is the same. The struggle of their families to get justice is the same.
So, if you can leave one parting thought to people that are tuned in or people that are going to be listening to this afterwards, and we will be releasing this, and there's been questions, we'll be releasing the recording, and we'll be putting together a podcast as well with this. If there's one parting thought you can give to everyone, when we talk about criminalizing dissent in India, when we talk about the importance of dissent in a democracy, what would it be?
I think all of us who are watching, everybody who is watching this, everybody around the world, everybody who has social media, and people who are witnessing this fascism and every day, and they're just frustrated, and who believe that there's no recourse, there's no outlet to let out their frustration, have to understand that we all have something. We have the power of social media, we have the power of blogging, we have the power of tweeting. 6 years ago, what is spoken today was not spoken of. At least today we are protesting. Something like the anti-CA protest happened because well-meaning people were brave enough to put out a tweet and ask everybody to come in solidarity. This is the time for people. This is the time to rise above religion, caste, culture. This is the time to rise up for humanity, because never before in the history of mankind has humanity been in a more desperate need to save itself. Like I said, they have come for me today, they will come for you tomorrow. Don't be in this misconception or this belief that because you are a part of the majority that you will not suffer. People always tell me, thank you for being, thank you for doing this, and you're so brave, and you're so fearless. I look at them and say, listen, don't call me brave and don't call me fearless. You're doing this because you want to place that battle on my shoulders. Don't shoot from my shoulder. By calling me brave, you're kind of outsourcing your battle to me. Don't outsource your battle to me. We have to fight this battle. We have to come out of the space of complacency. That, why should I do this? I'm comfortable outraging in my living room, watching television and abusing the news anchor. It's very simple to sit in your living room and outrage. It takes just one step to register your dissent, whether it's in your social media, whether it is countering your family WhatsApp group, whether it is coming, and if you can't fight, show solidarity with the people who are fighting the good fight for you. The people who are fighting the good fight, our activists, our journalists, need your support than never before. I can never, I think, stress more on the need for our solidarity like it is needed today. And I keep going to the example of our relief work. When I started this, there was a huge, I had to feed so many people, and my friend said, listen, how will you, it's one thing for you to start a keto campaign and thinking that you can make a great deal of difference, but it's not going to happen. I started a keto campaign, and so far we have about 3,000 supporters, and we have collected 1.5 crores. We have helped 40,000 families. We have sent 6,000 migrants home. We have done more than perhaps a state can do. That's the power of one individual putting out 1 rupee to help. So that's a good example. If you think something is bothering you, if you think injustice is bothering you, then start speaking up for those who are speaking for you. Start speaking up against injustice. Take that one step. Your first step today will embolden the generations who are yet to come to speak up and not suffer in silence.
I think that's as good as any moment to call it a webinar. Rana, thank you so much. That was quite something, and I think a lot to think about, a lot to chew on, and a lot to action on as well. We thank you so much.
I want to thank everybody who was. I think everybody who has participated here has taken the first step. Has taken the first step in being a dissenting voice by just logging into this and listening to this. So you have made that first step. I think it's time for all of us to stand together. And thank you so much for listening in.
Thank you so much for taking time out to do this. Thank you so much while you're battling a bug. We know that's not easy, so thank you again so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
and guys, one more reminder, please consider, I think this is for the people of this country, please consider, donating to our relief drive. It's a very important cause that we are fighting. It's a lonely battle, so it will be a great help for us. If you can donate to the Keto campaign, whose link has been given to you, you can go on my Twitter page, it's a pinned tweet. So thank you so much on behalf of everybody.
Yeah, we'll share the link again in the chat, but Rana, thank you. And hopefully next time it's in person after COVID.
Absolutely. I look forward to come to Canada very, very, very soon.
Thank you so much, and take care to everyone that tuned in. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.